Hi guys, and welcome to today's video where I have finally built Diego's Bioactive 80-gallon vivarium. Now I actually started this build back at the end of January where I started off with the drainage layer. Now a drainage layer seems to be a bit more of an option in arid tanks, but I decided to have one as it will allow for better airflow around the roots of the plants and prevent the tank getting boggy. After I washed through and added in the clay balls, I went to add some weed stop liner. So this was meant to be a good option for the drainage layer, but we soon realised that it didn't actually allow water to drain through, which is the purpose of it. So I had to go out and get some Lucky Reptile Hydro Fleece, as I've used this in other tanks before and it works well. Now it was a tad too small for the tank, so I had to get creative with covering the entire area. I then added in half a bag of Earth Mix Arid just to cover the floor before adding in anything else. Whilst I bought the Hydro Fleece, I also picked up a nice bit of cork bark, but it did come with a bit of an intruder. I had a white-legged snake millipede, which I never knew existed until now, but apparently it is native to the UK, so I did release it back into the wild. But this is why it's good to soak your cork before you actually put it in the tank. Even if it is cork or wood that you've been storing in your own house, spiders love this stuff, so before I use anything I do try to soak it beforehand. Anyway, I started to add in slate and other decor into this tank, and I know a lot of people ask me, where do you get your slate from? I always get it from garden centres because it's so much cheaper. So for example, each one of these were £4 each, whereas in the reptile and aquatic shops they were all £4 per kilogram, and I can guarantee you all each one of these pieces were over 10 kilograms each. So instead of paying over £40 each, definitely over £40 for some of them, so heavy, I paid £4. So I can't see any difference in the ones they sell in the reptile shop and the ones they sell in the garden centre, so I would always advise going to the garden centre. Anyway, back to decorating. This is when I ran into a big problem. I soon realised that the distance between the rocks and the heater and UV was going to be too big, and if you don't know why that is and the importance of that, please check out this video I did on the entire situation. But basically I realised I had to build up the area with bricks, rocks and slate. It was starting to get super heavy and look kind of messy. So I spoke to Paul from Custom Reptile Habitats, where this vivarium is actually from, and he came up with a great alternative. Now I had to wait a while for this to come because it had to come from America, but the new fake rock finally arrived, and when it did, I think it's safe to say I was very excited.
How much better does this look? Okay, so if you've seen my video about the distance between the heater and the UV at basking, and I've had to build up this area, so obviously you can do this multiple different ways, but this rock, if you do choose this kit, I believe now comes with the kit, which is such a great help. So if we measure it, so this is 30 centimetres, there's still a little bit left to build up, but nowhere near as much. And oh my goodness, I had to move, okay, because maybe I'm a little bit weak, but I had to move those bricks one at a time, that slate. It was so heavy, and this, like, proper tough. I can build stuff on this, but it's so light. And the good thing is, if we really wanted to, we could cut a hole in here somewhere, and that's an extra hide.
Now, as I said, originally I started this build at the end of January, but I actually only got the fake rock at the beginning of March. So the slate and the fake rocks had been sat in that tank for quite a while, nothing really happening in there, and the soil was a little bit damp when I first put it in, so when I started to remove things, I discovered something a little grim.
Ew. Okay, I just discovered something, and this is something sometimes you get if the soil was a bit damp when you first put it down. You've put a hide in it, it's trapped in that moisture, you get a bit of mould. You get this a lot more with high humidity tanks, and what I've found is if you move it all around, it usually kills off the mould. And if you have a cleanup crew, they're going to eat that all up. So it's not the worst thing, but I think it's best that I'm discovering this now before I've moved in Diego.
I then added in some Earth Mix Arid and started to build up the warm side with pieces of slate. Eventually I figured out where I wanted everything to be. I turned on the deep heat projector and had to leave it for a day or two to reach the temperature I needed. Now ideally I did want the slate to be around 32 degrees Celsius, however I think it takes a while to fully heat up just because the slate is so thick, so I think if I would have left it a few extra days it would have got there. Once I was happy with the height, I removed everything so I could work on the big fake rock. I decided to cut out a hole on either side of the rock. If I'm honest, I kind of hacked at it with a saw, and it wasn't actually that difficult to cut. I probably didn't need a saw. But basically inside the rock, it was almost like expanding foam or styrofoam, so I decided to cover it in sealant and add those oxides that I used when I was putting together the background. Now Diego has a massive new warm hide, and I feel like the entrance and exit holes are very subtle, so you wouldn't necessarily know it's a hide, but he can definitely get in there and hide when he needs to. I then added back in some slate and more earth mix arid into the tank. I think in total I used 2.5 bags, which isn't too bad because I did order 4, but sometimes I find if the substrate dries out it might shrink a little, so I can always top that up. Now at first I did add in an aloe vera next to the cork hide. It actually came with like pretty much no roots. It was reduced in Wilkinson's for like £1.50, but I did end up replacing it with carex grass. Now I ended up buying a pot of this for about £6 and I used maybe a third of it in the tank, so I have some spare in case the ones in the tank die or I want to use them in future builds. I found that the substrate at first can be a little dry, so I did want to water the plants the best I could. However, I found that the best way to do this is to spray them, because whenever I would pour water on the soil, as you can see, it just sort of ran over the top. So I think the best method to do this is to spray. I then found a place for this little aloe that I picked up from Tesco for 50p. This is how it came. It was so dry that when I got out the car, the wind took it and it flew out of the pot. But I ended up replacing it with earth mix arid, so when the time came to add it in the tank, it was just an easy transition. The tank was quite cork heavy, there was a lot going on, so I wanted to add in a bit of slate in the middle area of the tank. I also added thin bits of slate at the base of the tank to ensure moisture is locked in and to protect the roots from feeder insects. I added in a few more fake rocks which came with the kit and the rocky water bowl, and then gave the tank a good mist. I actually ended up with 2 spare rather large fake rocks, but I am sure I can use them in other builds. And then we were done. Diego's tank is finally done and I can give you a proper tour. The first thing to talk about are the glass doors. They are heavy, nice glass doors, very thick, and they're on wheels. Now if you're going to have a cleanup crew in there or you're worried about like feeder insects getting in, the kit did come with a sticky strip down here, which I may add, but I think it'd be cool if there was like a clear silicone one so it doesn't like put a line straight down here, but we'll see how that goes. But let's now get into the interior of the tank. So I wanted to first talk about the hides in the basking area, because when you're doing a normal terrarium with just plants and a bit of wood or rock, and it's just for display, it's so much easier, because when you're working with a terrestrial lizard who will probably dig up some things, who need places to hide and bask, and you want to get the heating and UV correct, there's a lot more planning needs to go in. Frankly though, I must admit, I kind of just made this up as I went along. So we'll start off over here. So this is going to be the basking area. This is where there's going to be optimum heat and UV. But of course, if you use anything like UV, you need to allow, and heat actually, your gecko to move away. So he can come down here. And as you saw, I made this rock into a hide, so he can get in through here. This is kind of, it's hard to see because it's so dark, but it's a secret compartment that he can go in. And around here, the hole's a lot bigger. Now, he does have this cork sort of tunnel thing going on, so he could use this as a hide on its own, or he could follow it around and get into this rock, or carry on around the back of this because that's also shaded. So when you're doing hides, they don't have to be physical, like one hide here, one hide here. You can think of the areas that are going to be shaded and feel secure, and they don't have to look exactly like one ceramic hide, one ceramic hide, you know what I mean? So we can be creative. So that's sort of over the warmer area. And then this is kind of like the cold hide. It's actually very spacious. It gets cut off a bit, you don't see it all, but this was a very large cork hide. There's also this. I didn't really know where to put this, so it is sort of plonked there at the moment. I figured he could walk up this. It's pretty sturdy. He can walk along the back. He can then come to here. So not only are we looking at hides, but also sort of like pathways. You may have noticed in my placement of slate. So I have a bit here because although the kit does come with a feeding dish, none of my geckos are raised with them, so they don't really recognise there's food there. So what I usually do is I find an area like this and I'll put like a worm on here or something like that, and it's almost like a feeding area. So I could do that here, I could do that here, here and here, but I wanted something like that in the middle just to sort of break up the dirt a bit as well. One thing I would seriously recommend if you're working on a tank this big is to use something like a deep heat projector, because I feel like if I only used a heat mat, not only would I not be able to put in a drainage layer, but the gecko would probably just stay on the heat mat. If there's one thing I've learned from using a deep heat projector is my geckos will use every part of their tank. So to go to an 80-gallon massive tank like this, I think that's definitely a must. Now, one thing you may have noticed, we do have our thermostat probe here. I haven't put the thermometer probe in yet. I do have one that it now comes with a little case it can go in. I'll show you here because I'm terrible at explaining things, and you just take the sticky strip off and you can actually stick it on the inside of the hood of the tank. Now this is probably going to be my ambient temperature, ambient humidity, so I can kind of see how the tank's doing, but I will have a thermometer directly here as well so I can see the exact temperature of the deep heat projector. Now I'm sure I have some questions about the cleanup crew. The only members I am going to add for the moment are springtails. Now I'm going to leave it for a few days for the plants to get sort of established before I add any in, but I have been told to keep adding them in, and basically the ones that will survive and breed. In terms of keeping like areas humid enough for them but not affecting the gecko so much, these little rocks would be perfect for it. So they're almost like pockets of humidity, so it won't affect Diego, but the springtails can thrive in there. I kind of feel like Diego would probably eat isopods, but that'll be something for the future if I feel the tank needs it. Now in terms of moving Diego in, I want to leave it at least a month for the plants to get established. There's a chance that I'll see this every day and I'll be like, actually I don't like that, I'm going to move that, or the grasses just don't do good and I have to swap them out for something else. So in that month things could change, but hopefully things thrive.
Later.
Okay, so this video is getting a little bit long, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to end it here, but in the next video you'll see Diego explore this tank because he is technically in here right now, but it gets interesting, trust me. Yeah, I can't actually get to him right now, but that video will be next, so make sure you are subscribed, you've got your notifications on so you can check that out. But thank you for watching guys, and goodbye.